and welcome to my latest podcast. My Just a View podcast is exactly that. It's just a view from me, Mike Foster, the entrepreneur's mentor. It is a view around something I may have observed over the recent weeks, or a discussion with a client or another business owner. And today it's really around the topical theme of the challenges that we've been facing in lockdown. So, what am I going to be covering? Well, I'm going to be covering the business support scheme that's offered by the government. I'm going to be looking at the fear of marketing during a lockdown. I'm going to be thinking about how we have to play by certain rules and whether that works for us. And then I'm going to end really today looking at 5 steps for any crises. So let's kick off then with the business support scheme from the government, because obviously it's very topical. It's an area that we've all perhaps looked at, whether that's through loans or the tax relief or maybe the grant schemes. It may be that we furloughed our staff, or if we're self-employed, we've explored the self-employed income support scheme. Now, my own personal opinion is generally it's not been ideal for many businesses and certainly hasn't been sufficient for many businesses. But it is a lifeline for many of us to help us survive through a very difficult period when many of us have just seen our sales revenue drop to, if not zero, more or less zero. So I do respect that it's a difficult position to have a catch-all solution for every businesses, but there are some big gaps of support with the existing schemes that I don't feel the government have really addressed or perhaps even taken seriously. The first one is the self-employed new startups. There is some money kicking around for the larger sort of tech startup businesses, but there isn't a real good scheme to support fairly new businesses, perhaps new businesses that started up in the last 6 months. They've just got some revenue working. Yes, you could go through universal credits, but perhaps looking at past income that people may have done if they've left a role to come into work, then it's been a little bit more difficult than perhaps the headlines have shown. The other area where I've seen much distress for businesses is that single director limited company. Perhaps in the past they've paid themselves using dividends and a small salary, ultimately using the tax rules set by our government for particular reasons that they set those rules in the past, perhaps to get us to all go to limited companies. But they've really sort of fallen through the gaps of so many support schemes. They can't furlough themselves because they may have some work, or they're not sick actually in terms of themselves already for sick pay. And ultimately, because the scheme only really works so in terms of supporting the salary, then it's left a big gap for those businesses. And if we look at the numbers, there's a huge number of those type of businesses that underpin our economy. So it's really disappointing, in my view, that those people have been missed from the support schemes. There is a general feeling out there of the furlough being a real stopgap for businesses, but my worry, and the worry for many, I believe, is that it's just a stopgap towards redundancies. Already hearing examples of people starting the redundancy processes in terms of consultations, whilst the government are paying the furlough wages, so that if at the end of the day, after October or whenever it's extended to next, and who knows why it's October, perhaps the government knows something we don't actually know, but ultimately, I think there's going to be a huge number of redundancies after the government stop this element of support. I agree, it's been welcome, it's been supportive, but has it really been enough in the right areas? And I think now, in the past, where we've perhaps been, as business owners, firefighting and in the fix stage, trying to fix those things that come at us on a daily basis during a crisis, businesses are now, for me, moving forward into that planning stage. So we now know what we can claim, we now know what we have claimed maybe. So now it's about planning, it's about forecasting, and using sensitivity analysis to continue considering the what if scenarios, because we still don't really know what's going to happen in the next few months. So although we can plan and we can forecast, do your sensitivity analysis and consider those what if scenarios that if the sales pipeline doesn't come back as quickly as you'd want, or it doesn't recover as quickly as it was in the past, then what's going to be the impact on your business, as an example. The second element I wanted to cover around lockdown and the challenges that we face is that I've heard many people say that they can't be seen to be marketing their business during these difficult times because they don't want to be seen as gaining from other people's misfortunes. Well, I think I look at this from my own perspective to start with. I know that businesses, they had to stay positive. I knew that they had to have a plan to, first of all, survive. And I knew that they needed to have a plan to thrive the other side when we come out of lockdown. But ultimately, my experience was that people didn't need to be told that. They didn't need to know that. There was many other things that were impacting on them. So I do empathise with the message that many people have been talking to me about. So I do understand the empathy at this time, but ultimately we've never been closer to how our audience actually are feeling. So I wouldn't be afraid of still marketing my business if I believed that there was some value to those that are likely to buy my services. However, in every crisis and recession, maybe, or other similar sort of circumstances, there will always be winners. And my view is if you have the opportunity to be one of those winners, then it's your time. Ultimately, as entrepreneurs and business owners, we have good times and we have bad times. And ultimately, if this is a good time for you, then you should be maxing out. But one word of comfort, I believe, is that I'm finding that those businesses that are winning during this lockdown don't really have to worry about their messaging and what they're saying in their marketing, because they're not really having to market that hard for the customers to come forward, because those customers are actually looking for their solutions. The third area is play by the rules. Now, I guess a podcast about lockdown at this moment in time couldn't explore that much press in the last few weeks has been around how many of us have made huge sacrifices during this lockdown, but one senior advisor felt that he could interpret the rules in a different way to probably what we all heard or what the headlines was telling us, and very few of us knew about the small print, if you like. Now, I admit that it's been quite cleverly cited around exceptional circumstances, and few of us were aware of those to even consider them. And I agree, it's time to move on. But in my own view, I do believe his statement was cleverly written in reflection of that small print, and actually in a timely way that much had already been passed, and much had already been quoted, and much of the facts had already been established. So it was quite easy to make a statement with all that in mind. I do think the media have continued to be sensational around certain things. I don't like that we build people up and we knock them down very, very easily. And I don't think the media have been very clever in terms of the questions. The questions after the press conference were very repetitive, and not only very few really explored into the detail. I do wonder, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, is whether the advisor felt that he had an opportunity of power with our own Prime Minister unfortunately taken ill and taken into hospital, but that could be a conspiracy theory. But I think for me, around playing by the rules, entrepreneurs like control, and ultimately we have at this moment in time lots of uncertainty, and we have rules that we have to abide by. So for many of us who feel that we want to be in control of our destiny, and hence why we are entrepreneurs, are ultimately out of control of many things. We don't really know when we can open up again, when we're out of lockdown, what those dates are looking like, although there's some signs of recovery coming through. We don't know when our customers will be buying again, when ultimately our staff will be back engaging with us and be fully back to work, fully productive. So many things that are necessarily out of our control that makes things uncomfortable for us. However, my consideration and perhaps the learn from my observations around this, and I quoted this on my Twitter account, is to ensure that you're making or influencing the rules to which you have to abide. Ultimately, that senior advisor was heavily involved in putting the rules together. So he knew the rules that he could play by and ultimately played very cleverly to those rules, you may argue. So if we put this into a business perspective, we decide on what the rules are that we want to play by, the rules that will create the boundaries that we have to adhere to and that we can work within for our business. And if we know our own rules, we can move forward with the same confidence that we've acted in the right way to develop our business. And I said I would close this podcast today by sharing with you the 5 common steps in a crisis. Now, this is any crisis, not just a pandemic, but the first step is really to assess the impact on your business right now, the first stage. And that's really about protection. That's really about protecting your business, what you have now, and making sure that the business doesn't ultimately fall over and how it survives. Then the second stage is to identify what your people need and communicate effectively with all your stakeholders. And when I say people, that might be obviously your staff, extending that to your subcontractors and your supply chain, but obviously your customers, it may be your board, and all your stakeholders that are involved in your business. The third step is to establish what your customers need and ensure that you offer them support and ultimately give them confidence that you're still in business, you're still able to service their requirement. Then we move on to the stage whereby probably where we are now is most businesses are having to have a vision for post-crises. What's our business going to look like after lockdown or once we're back to whatever the normal may be? And then the fifth step is then how do we create and plan a strategy for the short term, but also considering the long-term picture. So what is our strategy for the business in terms of the first few months after lockdown, and then again, the longer term picture? Are we going back to our original plan, or are we going to be basically flexing that longer term vision or that longer term plan? Now, if you do follow me on social media, you see early on in the lockdown period, I shared my business protection contingency plan guidelines, and I'll just reflect on those points of areas for you. One is to think about your strategy, which I've just mentioned. The second area is to think about your operations and your operational excellence and the things that operate your ability to run the business effectively. Third area is ultimately your cash flow, thinking about your cash requirements, what you may have outstanding, and in terms of planning forward. Then again, thinking about your people and the whole range of what I call people, not just people on your PAYE, but on your whole supply chain, your customers, your stakeholders. Reflect on your marketing, and does your marketing need to change? Does your offering need to change? Do you need to pivot your business in any particular way? And what impact is that making on your customers? Speak to your customers and think about the feedback that they're giving to you. And importantly, reflect and think about yourself. Think about your mindset, think about your own health, and think about the support that you need in terms of running your own business so that you can survive and thrive into the future. So I hope this podcast has been of interest and useful for you. It's giving you some thoughts to think about within your own business. A reminder, it's just a view from me, and I'll hopefully see you next time for another view that I'll be sharing with you.